Greetings everyone, welcome to 2018 on the Dark Spider David channel, and as usual, the first week or two of January is all about the best of the best that came down from 2017. I wish I could do some worst of lists for games and for movies because those would be a tremendous amount of fun, but I have to be careful with my money. I don't get stuff for free, so I have to kind of pick and choose, and if I stumble across something that's bad, then hopefully it'll end up on a list somewhere. But for the time being, I'm here to talk about my 5 favorite games of 2017. But before I get to what exactly did make the cut, I want to talk about some of the few honorable mentions that came just a little tiny bit short, but were still good enough for me to actually recommend if you missed them throughout this year. So first on that list would have to be the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Telltale series. There's a couple of episodes that I thought were just a little bit on the weak side or kind of filler-ish, where I think maybe they could have just done just as well, which is 3 episodes, but those 3 other episodes as part of the 5 were stellar. They got the characters right, they got the humor right, and by the end of it, some of the choices I was making were making me sweat. So that's a good thing for Telltale to do. Next is Shadow of War. Middle-earth Shadow of War ends up as an honorable mention because the gameplay is still top-notch, the Nemesis system is still great and still very addictive, but it's because of that last gauntlet section that the microtransactions kind of take a slight little emphasis that made me go, you're not top 5 material. You came so close, yet so far. Blame WB for that. And lastly on my honorable mentions, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, a very polished expansion that was almost worthy of being just a flat-out standalone game. In fact, if Uncharted 1 came out and then Uncharted 2 was this, The Lost Legacy, of course not exactly with the same exact graphical integrity that you find here on the PS4, but if it was in the similar vein of the storytelling and the gameplay and the mechanics and all that stuff, I would have bought it as Uncharted 2. Especially with the running time of it being around 8 or 9 hours or so, it was still a very decent expansion that I had an awful lot of fun playing through. And I'm torn, but I kind of want to put Prey as an honorable mention, but I can't, only because I'm technically still playing it as I'm recording this video, so I haven't finished it. But so far, from what I can tell, the story could use a little bit more work, and it could have used its own little personality to make it stand out more so than reminding me an awful lot of Dead Space. But the things that it gets right is in the gameplay and me finding out ways to kind of deviate from the survival horror and try to survive, trying to actually become something better than what it was at the beginning, running away from these creatures as opposed to hopefully being able to hunt down these creatures myself. And that does it for my honorable mentions. So let's start off with number 5 of the best of 2017. Tales of Berseria. My first Tales game from the entire franchise, and it ends up being on my top 5 because from the get-go I could tell that I was going to jump into this game, spent about 2 or so hours into it, and I was like, yeah, you know, the addictive process of going through these side quests, but at the same time trying to master this mechanic system that was brand new to me, became very enthralling. Now, over time, I did find myself kind of biting off a little bit more than I could chew because there were just so many rules that it was starting to feel a little overwhelming. Like, certain tutorial sections would pop out even about 10 hours into the game saying, every time you do this move, you'll gain certain souls, or you'll lose 1 soul, but you're able to master this art and blah blah blah. And it was starting to lose me, but I stuck with it, and before I know it, I was very engaged with not just the mechanics of the game, going around the entire environment and jumping onto the ship and being able to sail from one area of the map to the other, while at the same time being able to talk to all these townsfolk, exploring more of the lore that makes up this whole entire story. And most importantly of all is the story and the characters that inhabit it that made me feel much more engaged because I cared about an awful lot of them, especially because of how different the story for this felt as opposed to usual JRPGs that I have played in the past. Sure, I've never played a Tales game before, but from what I hear, most of the Tales games are very JRPG-ish, especially with the story where it's all about positivity and being the best that you can be, and Tales of Berseria is all about, like, I don't give a shit about anything else, I want to kill this one guy. And I'm like, that's a little different. So I was very much interested and hooked from beginning to end. And sure, there were times where I had to give myself a break because I was racking in about, what, 50 to 60 hours into this game, but when those credits rolled, I felt like it was worth it. The number 4 spot goes to HELLBLADE: SENUA'S Sacrifice. A game that I think was sneaking up on us until I think I want to say about a couple weeks prior to its release, where so many behind the scenes videos were coming out, and then the story and the premise of the entire game was captivating to a lot of people, where it was about this girl who was going on a journey of self-discovery through Scandinavian territory back in like ancient times. But what was really the hooking factor for a lot of people, myself included, is that this girl suffers from psychosis, where she hears voices, she sees hallucinations, and that affects the gameplay. But it wasn't as video gamey as other games have done in the past, where it kind of fucks with you, but in that video game style where it depletes your health or stuff like that. Here it felt much more nuanced. It felt much more like you felt a gravity of the situation, almost like you felt like you had psychosis. But I mean that in the most complimentary form, type of way, where they consulted people who actually had psychosis, who were dealing with these symptoms, and they tried to treat it as respectfully as they possibly could. And I got the idea of that. I got the gist of that. I felt like they were treating this with care, and it kind of turned me over to the whole aspect of psychosis that is a real life thing, and gave me much more respect for it than I already had. And on top of that, it's just a really well-crafted game, taking that ambiance of psychosis and applying to it without ever it feeling like a gimmick and feeling like I was trying to push this protagonist, Senua, which I had humongous loads of empathy for, or sympathy, I should say. Empathy, I think, is the one where you kind of relate because you have the same thing. I don't. I can never put myself in that situation. I feel like she has to be one of the strongest protagonists I've seen in a video game, and she carried the entire thing. And the actress, who wasn't initially going to be cast in this thing until the very last moment, carried the entire game and made it her own. And I think that because of that, it made it one of the staples for 2017. If you have not played this game by a slightly smaller, much more independent division of Ninja Theory, who's responsible for like the Ninja Gaiden games and all that stuff, much more action-oriented stuff, then I think you deserve to take a look at this game even at full price and go into it blindly. And trust me, I think you're gonna end up walking away with it feeling almost kind of like illuminated by something brand new, as opposed to the usual video game stuff that you probably have played in the past. I feel almost ashamed about going into my next game, just landing at number 3, because we go from something super serious and melancholic like HELLBLADE: SENUA'S Sacrifice over to South Park: The Fractured Butthole. Alright, that's my number 3, and this game I found to be one of those games where it has an awful lot of side quests and little materials and stuff like that that normally I get kind of turned away from, because if you guys know me, you know that I love side quests that have story built within it, where it's got like its own little character, and South Park: Fractured Butthole has that going on with its RPG elements. But the two things that I wasn't so sure of, but then I found myself just spending hours and hours upon it, is both some of the side quests that involves collecting a certain amount of things, but I was actually willing to do with it because it's easy to traverse South Park here in this game thanks to a fast travel system. But along with that, you got the same South Park humor that you probably should be getting used to by now if you haven't already, because trust me, you're going to end up being offended. You got the classic animation style that fools you into thinking that you're playing a South Park episode, and then you got a gameplay system that feels somewhat similar to what you got in Stick of Truth, but then it also feels a little bit different, with kind of like a tabletop mapping to the entire thing where you have to choose your little spot. It's almost like XCOM meets the gameplay that you found in Stick of Truth and mesh it into one. And because of that, I found myself very enthralled and very addicted somewhat to the gameplay, where I was like, where are those bullies? Let me track those guys down, try to experiment with as many powers as I get for my character, and at the same time being able to get along with all these characters from South Park and figure out what type of shenanigans and what type of very offensive and outlandish things are going to come up with next. Alright, number 2 is, quite frankly, almost a tie with number 1. I spent a humongous amount of time just trying to bounce back and forth which one's my number 1 and number 2. They're pretty much at neck and neck. In fact, if I could tie them, I would. But I had to separate them, and falling to number 2, but still very much high regarded amongst my list, has to be Injustice 2. I never thought that I was going to put up a fighting game up as number 2, but not only did this have a great story that, as great as it was, I do prefer the first one, but what Injustice 2 really surpassed its predecessor in was both the graphical infrastructure of the design of the characters and the environments that they were in, but the gameplay is still there. It's still an awful lot of fun being able to keep your opponents up in the air while at the same time jumping into multiplayer and testing out your skills versus various other people. But then you take the characters that you already know, like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all that stuff, along with some brand new characters added to the roster like Supergirl, Swamp Thing, yada yada, and then being able to amplify them more so than you have already seen them before in prior games, movies, TV shows, whatever, with the gear system that is addictive as fuck. And this is one of the few games this year where I had already beaten the story. I did the arcade section for all the characters where you got that little storyboard type of cinematic at the very end for each and every single one of the characters. I did all that. I played every single mode. I didn't complete every single mode, but I played all of them to test out what it is that this game has to offer. And I was still playing the game for like a week straight after I had already completed everything. And usually with a fighting game, I'm done after testing out all the characters and all the modes. Here I was still spending another like 10 hours or so in the game because I wanted to get as much gear as I possibly could. I knew I wasn't going to get everything, but that gear system is so addictive that I stuck with it for a good while. And I cannot say that very much about almost any other game that came out this year, except for maybe my #1 game. And so the #1 spot of my favorite game for 2017 goes to Horizon Zero Dawn. Again, it was very neck and neck with Injustice 2. They're pretty much tied, but if I had to rank them, Horizon takes the top spot because it was a, let's just say it's a brand new experience that from a developer that you weren't expecting to create something like this. You got Guerrilla Games, who usually make the Killzone games, first person 7-8 hour or so experiences, and then they out of nowhere blow us out of the water with this brand new universe, this brand new story with a very strong protagonist that I'm bound to like collect the action figure for at some point, or would love to see in a sequel game day one, immediately purchasing it. But on top of that, I was still spending upon hours in this environment long after beating the story, trying to hunt down that one fucking dino robot that I couldn't beat earlier in the game. But now, because of the upgrades that I was able to make to Aloy, I was able to go out there and take it down, as well as explore these areas of the map that I didn't encounter before, and create all these upgrades and just spend hours just being engrossed into this world that just managed to suck me in. And if that didn't convince you enough, this game came out in February of this year and has managed to remain in my memory bank up until now. Here we are almost a year later, and I'm still thinking about Horizon Zero Dawn, and I'm still thinking about jumping back into it along with various other games for my little break spot between, you know, going through another run of brand new games for the PS4, brand new games for the PS3, or whatever. I still want to be like, I just want to spend just a couple more hours with Horizon Zero Dawn, and I think that that is a game worthy of landing in my #1 spot. And that does it for my top 5 games of 2017. David, where the fuck is Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, PUBG? Yeah, well, I don't have a Switch. My computer doesn't exactly have the best requirements to run PUBG, nor does my internet. And I just did not have the time to jump into Persona 5, because it was either that one game or at least another 5 or so games that could have contended for my games of the year. So I had to make choices, guys. Hopefully I won't have to make that many choices in 2018, because I'll try to be a little bit much more timely with the games that are coming out. Because here we are in January and we already got 2 hyped up games, Dragon Ball FighterZ and Monster Hunter World, I'm sorry. And I'm very much looking forward to those, because, oh my god, my wallet. Now it's your guys' turn. Let me know in the comments below what were your guys' favorite games of 2017. What were your guys' worst games of 2017? Post them in the comments below, as well as any honorable mentions that you think deserve some recognition. And also be sure to show your support with the video by hitting the like and share button. And of course, subscribe to my channel for more videos coming out very soon throughout 2018. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you all later. Take care. It kind of tries to do what certain other asymmetrical multiplayer games do, where one character is this big powerful thing and then the other characters are just regular humans trying to take it down. All out Friday the 13th right now. Evolve, however, wasn't as pristine and polished as, well, neither is Friday the 13th.